this up so you can see it better. It's the same plan, just with the red letters added, red comments added. And Jason talked about the two subjects that we discuss, that I'm prepared to discuss. I'm going to do them in sort of reverse order because I think I want to talk about the cost first. This is fairly straightforward, and it's information, and really information you need to have as you move toward a capital campaign to guide you personally as to what you feel your commitment can be and what part you can really play financially in a capital campaign to support the growth of this church. So, I tried to break this down in some fairly simple ways. The budget is pretty complicated. When a contractor does an estimate for you, it's usually single-spaced lines and it's about 2 full pages. But I tried to break this down into some components that you could easily understand. First and foremost, I want to remind you that our core goal here is to create a worship space for you that will seat up to 250 persons. That's the core goal. There are a lot of other goals that go along with that. What is it going to look like? How's it going to feel? How much is it going to cost? Just all of those other things. But the core goal is to get you a space that you can worship in. It may not be as pretty as you would love it to be, but what's that core? And that's what this number right here represents. $837,250 in the estimate we've done so far. I call that a shell building. And I call it a shell building because it's a space. It's a nice space. But in my opinion, it's not a beautiful space. It's not the space you would really love to have. The committee that I worked with, your architectural committee, as we worked through the months of several meetings, we talked about a lot of those details. A lot of that feedback came from them personally and their personal experiences and input. It also came from the Dream Wall that y'all all participated in and that we paid some attention to all along the way. So, and we'll talk about those parts of the design process in a few minutes. So that's the shell building cost to get the space. It has some height to it. It has a chancel. It has all the basic elements your chapel has, but in a much larger way, just not quite as fancy as your chapel is. No stained glass windows yet, no wood floors yet, no exposed beams yet. Follow? Okay, that's the core. There are other expenses that it takes to get even just that core constructed. That's what we're calling here just a group of expenses called testing. There's some architectural and engineering fees that would have to be paid to help you get a finished building. There's some testing have to be done, some surveying, and so forth. So we try to give you a comprehensive budget that allocates for what those other kinds of expenses are. There's also an owner's contingency. You need to have at this stage, in an early stage of a project, you always need to have an owner's contingency. Because these are pretty pictures, but they don't have every last little detail. You really don't have that until you've done complete working drawings for a building. And so you really need to have a contingency. In the best of worlds, allowances have been made for that in these other numbers. And you get to spend that in a different way, a way to maybe make some enhancements. But that doesn't always happen. So it contains an owner's contingency, and that gives us a base building budget of $991,000. Okay, that compares to I think some numbers were mentioned before, perhaps by David, that the goal for your capital campaign might be in the neighborhood more of $1.2 million, $1.3 million, something like that. So what is the difference? There are some other things that you would love to have and ultimately would want to have someday. Particularly one of the large elements would be a new organ. It's been said to us by the people who do your organ maintenance work, Schluter in Stone Mountain, that this new space would probably require ultimately a new organ. It would be much fuller and grander than the organ you have now, and that's, whether they can rebuild that or not, we don't really know, and expand it. They're beginning some preliminary work now just to look into that. But that could be easily in the neighborhood we've been just told, and I think I heard, I've not been directly involved in that yet, but I think I heard something on the order of, it could be $50,000 to $100,000 for the kind of organ that would really be most befitting for the new space. You have to have that right away? Of course not. Is it a core building to worship? Would you want to have that? We'd love to. We'd love to. So that's some basic information. Now, to represent the design as it stands right now, as you've seen in these panels before, and we've talked about it, presented to you before, there are some other elements that our architectural committee and the input we've gotten from the congregation incorporated into this design. And I'm just going to elaborate, and that's what these other elements are around here. And they would be additive to this core, to get us to a building that we think we would love to have and feel really good about for the future of the church. One is an exposed wood ceiling, not unlike, say, what you have in the chapel now, or something similar to what you have in the fellowship hall here. Some open beams that add some continuity of character in the new sanctuary to the buildings that you have now, the spaces you have now. And that represented about $21,000 to add that kind of element to the project. To have wood flooring adds about $15,000 to the project. And that would probably be a good hardwood floor throughout the entire worship space. To add a brick front, okay? We don't have to have a brick front to get a core worship space. But we decided, the architectural committee decided, and this was really kind of a suggestion on my part, to help distinguish the sanctuary from the rest of the buildings, is we sort of reversed the materials. I think I mentioned that in my earlier presentation. So the other buildings are basically stucco. We with a brick base and some brick elements over the windows, we reversed that materials to help distinguish that as the sanctuary. So the brick front adds about $10,500 in here. The portico, which is a really non-essential, but I think for the long term, critical element of the design. We don't have a bell tower. You have a worship space that's kind of in line with the rest of the other buildings. And when you approach the site, you, as a member, much less a visitor, wants to know where the sanctuary is. And this is an element that does both help really establish that identity for the sanctuary, even though it's in line with the other buildings, and provides an element of covered entry, which was one of the goals, those other goals that we had in the design process. So the portico here represents about $50,000. It's a pretty sizable element. Seating, chairs, pews, liturgical elements. They represent as much as possibly, if they're all new especially, $55,000. That would be if you wanted to buy all new chairs, all new pews, and liturgical elements for the chancel as well, which would be possibly a new altar table, a new lectern, new side tables, etc. So I put these two elements together. The seating, chairs, and pews would be $55,000, and liturgical elements and furnishings would be another $10,000. And the last element I've identified here is new parking. And I said at the Arts Center, but we had tossed around a number of places to put it, and we decided that sort of the best place to put it would be in the rear, so we could also have some ability to approach from that side. But we also talked about expanding parking in the front. But that can be studied a lot further, but there was an allocation for a number of parking spaces, additional parking spaces of $49,500. And that's what gets us to a total construction budget of $1,200,000. Okay, and I mentioned the organ. The organ was not in that number, and that's where the $1,300,000 number got mentioned before by David. So that's kind of an all-inclusive thing. And with those kind of costs, you can get what you see here. Now, what you see here, though, I still want to emphasize what Jason is saying. What you see here is where we are in a long-standing process that we will continue to go through. This is where we are based on the input that's been provided, based on the wisdom of the Architectural Selection Committee in interpreting that, and based on a little input from me from time to time. So, is it changeable? Absolutely, is it changeable? Are there other things that we could change about it and explore? Absolutely, there's still plenty of time to do that. This is what we call the schematic design phase. The next phase, once we're authorized to move forward, we call what we call the design development phase. And in that phase, we continue to seek input. We would also explore more detail so that we can refine these cost figures more and more as we go. And determine that as we make adjustments to the design and refine the design, that we're staying within at least this budget or some reduced budget that you may come back to us for based on your capital campaign. Speaking to that point, one of the things that's always hard to communicate is so what happens if you have a capital campaign for $1,300,000 and you don't raise commitments for that? What happens? Do you get disappointed? Part of my job is to help not get disappointed, is to find ways that we can get your core and that you can add on to that as the church grows and prospers in the future. And that's part of why I want you to kind of hear and see these numbers about some of these elements. In the worst of cases, we could build this and we could still add all of that at any point later on. We would want to do things that would not have to be reversed. In other words, that you've spent money on and that we have to tear out later on. That would be really important. And all these elements that I've mentioned here are things that could be added without having to do that. So I want you to understand that my goal is to get you a core at its very basic level. My additional goal is to hopefully get you a lot more than that. But that all depends on how we work together, and all depends on, frankly, how your capital campaign goes. Okay? Any questions about that? Yes. I was hoping there would be at least
Are mortgages available to churches?
I'm sorry?
Are conventional mortgages ever available to churches?
Oh, yes, they are. And that's really kind of out of my field, but because I have to deal with costs through the whole process, I invariably hear and see a lot about what goes on with that. Church project I completed this last January in Cartersville, Episcopal Church in Cartersville. They raised about, I think about $850,000 in their capital campaign, and they borrowed about $300,000 beyond that in order to do everything they wanted and felt they needed to do.
They must have a mortgage.
And they went to a community bank.
Thing here, because we just paid it off a year or so ago, and it didn't.
And it's really nice to not have a mortgage.
If I may interject here, there are mortgages available through commercial banks. Also the diocese, if you meet certain criteria, will loan, I think, up to $200,000, 3.5%, 4% over 30 years. And there's other church entities that
There are a few foundations that make modest contributions.
So, I mean, the goal is, obviously, nobody wants to have a mortgage. I don't know anybody that wants to rush out and get a mortgage. Or maybe, but I certainly don't. But they can be a bridge to what you can raise in the capital campaign to what your goal is. They can bridge that. Now, the vestry and those involved will have to make sure that whatever financial commitment they make could be achieved without harm to the parish financial structure. So yes, as we do in our own lives, nobody wants to be, I know nobody wants a mortgage, but most all of us have had one in our lives. And from my own experience, I never want to be married to a mortgage again. So, so I hope that helped a little bit, Jamie.
Okay. Just about explain to everyone in here what if we just decided to go with the shell building, tell them what that would be finished on the inside.
On the inside?
Yes.
It would be primarily all drywall finishes, walls, ceiling. There would be a raised ceiling that would be shaped, so there would be, it wouldn't be just a flat box, if you will, in that sense. It would be primarily an all drywall walls. There would probably be some reduced trim over what you see perhaps in the section here. You'd still get the windows that are shown there, at the very least. We can obviously explore, other windows as we go through the process later on even too, because there's been some comments about windows. But you would not, in the floor, it would be something quite simple. It would either be probably a vinyl tile or a very inexpensive carpet. And I'd rather you not do carpet from an acoustic standpoint. I'd rather keep the space lively. But you wouldn't have your exposed truss ceiling here. And that's the one, I'm going to go against one thing I said a minute ago. That's the one thing on this panel right here that I would hope, at the very least, if we had to pick one thing, the first thing is that we would do that, because that's the one thing that's not very easily reversed.
Could you go with a truss like this with sheetrock panels in between?
You could, but they're going to be real economical and they're not going to be very pretty.
Well, they
They're gonna
serve
be
a
very
purpose.
pretty, but they would serve a purpose, yes.
If we're trying to build a building.
Right, that's exactly right. Yes.
Did I hear you say, and I just want to make sure that I heard this correctly, this is a space less fancy than the chapel?
Yes, I think, I'm being blunt, it's less fancy than the chapel, because it doesn't use stained glass windows, it doesn't have the brick textural walls that you have, which I think are actually kind of nice. It doesn't have the wood floor, which you have, and the core does not have the exposed beam ceiling.
Doesn't have any seats either.
I'm sorry?
Doesn't have any seats either.
No, it doesn't. That's correct. It doesn't have any seats in it. But let me just say, churches are just really, really resourceful at finding seats. They may not be the most comfortable, at least to start out. At least to start out. I got thinking the other day, because in the committee we had lots of conversation about seats, pews, chairs, combination of the two, whatever. I got to thinking, what if, and I would need to measure the pews again, but what if we move the pews from the chapel to the new space? At least initially.
We need a chapel.
You need a chapel, that's correct. But you could accommodate, you could consider accommodating, I don't know what the right word would be, chairs in the chapel that would be a little bit flexible, maybe fewer chairs than there are pews because of how the chapel might get used. And that would help mitigate some pew costs, at least initially. At least initially. It wouldn't be ideal. You'd love to have, and I'd love to see you have, all new pews that are selected just for the design of that space. But those are the kind of things that are going to bubble up. Those are kind of ideas that are going to bubble up in the process continually as we go through this whole process and try to figure out how to get you there beyond a minimum. Maybe not the whole thing. I sure hope so, but at least in a way that's comfortable and accommodating, and that you can appreciate, enjoy, and continue worship in a spiritual way. There was another question, yes?
Yes. I may be stupid, but why does the ceiling cost so much more than the wood floors when it's the same volume that you're covering?
because it involves the structure of the building in terms of holding up the roof. The wood floors are really just essentially a little veneer on the subfloor that you would already have.
But we'd wear them out, and we'd have to do them over and over again. The ceiling we would never wear out.
Good oak floors, good hard pine floors, they're not gonna wear out in my lifetime. Probably not in your children's lifetimes. So, I think we have good floors to do that. And that's what these would be. These are not, this cost figure is not related to what you might find just Home Depot, where it's real thin and you can just put it over whatever you happen to
Like
have.
laminate, yeah.
These would be full, thick, hardwood floors. Good old traditional ones, like we used to have in our houses, a lot of them.
Now, you do
Years and
anything,
years ago.
the wooden ceiling like this, or there's gonna be wood in between the beams?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that. There would actually be, where you have white panels here, it would actually be stained wood
Okay.
decking. Actually, it would be beams.
You have wood
It'd be a little bit different from this, but generally this idea of spaced beams, larger beams, and then there would be a wood decking above that that would be stained and exposed. Yes.
My question is, why do we have to have a covered entry? I mean, that's $50,000 that we could save. I just don't see the necessity of adding one.
I can answer that. Rain, elderly, handicap, it's useful.
But I don't see an handicap ramp on this.
There it is.
Well-
There's a handicap ramp right here. Right here.
Okay.
Gets you from the drop-off point up to the main level. And then there's ramps, there's a ramp also here back to the level of the production hall.
Well, that's an add-on feature anyway.
That is simply an
So, I
add-on.
mean-
If you didn't do that originally, it
If
can
we could
easily
build a
be added
building,
on
we
later
could
on.
add that on.
Later on.
It can
If
be.
everybody's concerned about a mortgage, we can certainly add it on later. If you're not concerned about a mortgage, we can add it on at the end of it.
I will tell you too, that, there've been many campaigns that I've worked with, many churches I've worked with in their campaigns, and it's amazing how, once you see things happening about, what can happen after the fact, financially even too. People get inspired. The dynamics of and I'm gonna be out of my league on this, but I will just make this comment. The dynamics of the capital campaign are often all about how is everybody going to give. And we all have personal reservation about how much we want to commit relative to what we think everyone else is going to commit. And I will tell you that more often than not, once you determine how much you can afford to do by your capital campaign, just about every time, maybe in a small way, but maybe sometimes in larger ways, some money flows later on in that campaign, just because of those kind of human factors that are part of this whole process. So now that's to say though that we need you to give at the highest level you feel like you can in a capital campaign of this nature, because we know this is a little bit of a push probably for y'all as a church. So anyway, any other questions?
I was part of a construction of a sanctuary for the Church of Conscious Harmony in Austin, Texas. And to cut costs, we used interior walls with hay bale. Is that less money? We were told it was a lot less money, and it also helped with heat, installation. Have you ever done anything like that?
No, I've not. I've read a lot about it. And I've seen a number of published articles about mostly residential, not as much as the church. I'd be interested in hearing more about that.
Well, it's on, you know, the.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with it enough
The
to
Church of
know.
Conscious Harmony, if anybody wants to
Okay.
look at it on the
Okay.
internet, and it seats about 400 people.
It sounds,
And it's beautiful.
I know, I'm sure it is. And it probably sounds to most of us like it's a little bit on another planet.
You don't see, you don't see the hay bales. They're just.
Right, you don't see hay bales. That's true.
It's not like
What the hay bales do for you is they provide a thermal mass in the walls. It really does make a difference in terms of conditioning of the space.
Right.
That's one of the beauties of that construction technique. I'm not as familiar with having done it, obviously I've not done it before, and I'm not really as familiar with the long longevity. I'm sure that it must have some level of decent longevity, or they wouldn't have done it in the first place. But so yes.
I wasn't at the last meeting, but was there discussion about the tree that's back behind there and that will have to be removed? And is there the possibility of using the wood from that tree to build the space?
At the last meeting, nobody asked about the tree. Just a point of fact. But that tree is going to have to be removed in this concept. And that's an unfortunate consequence, but also that tree probably doesn't have too many more years left in its life. It's really large and it's beautiful right now, but it's showing some signs of the branches are not working out in some areas. We haven't talked about that, but I will tell you that there have been other churches I've worked with that they have actually done that, to salvage that wood and made use of that wood in various ways. I have a cross collection at home. I have about 50 small crosses of various sizes. And one of the ones I received recently is made from a tree in front of a church that I did an expansion of.
Yeah, I think it'd be really neat to be able to use that
It would be.
somehow.
My vision was to use the tree to make the altar out of it. I mean, I think it'd be fantastic, but it's not gonna be, it's gonna cost something to do.
Well, you can build it then.
Part of that, the church will furnishings.
Thank you.
I encourage you to ask Randy questions, you're letting him off way too easy.
Yes.
I have a question about the beamwork again.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure I understand this. So, are you saying that if we spend the money to build it that way, that is done because of the structure of the building and would not need to be redone later if we wanted to do it?
If you do it this way, no, it'd be finished. It'd be finished.
Okay.
You spend the $21,000 wood ceiling, it would be finished.
Okay.
That same structure, if we didn't spend that $21,000, actually the same structure would be, let me restate it. It would be the same structure. It would just be covered up, as Noah said, with drywall. And if you wanted, actually in that case, you actually could take the drywall off and expose that structure later on, but it would need some work. What we would do is raw structure would not be what you would want to see as finished structure, okay?
So you're saying, in other words, if we ultimately wanted that, it would be cheaper to do it now, and easier with the right way
It
first?
definitely would be,
than-
because we'd have to take the cost to take the drywall off and do some additional trim work.
I just want to make sure.
Yes, that's good.
When we're, if we get to this point, when we get to this point, rather than using plywood for decking, I think we could just use the tongue and groove 1x6, 1x8, and put the roof on top of that, and go ahead and stain it.
Right.
I think we could include a wood deck ceiling in here with beams in the $800-something thousand price. If you're gonna put a deck up there and not finish it, put drywall on top of it, why don't you just put the deck up there to start with?
Right. And actually, Miller, this number anticipates that wood deck would be up there.
Okay.
But it would just be covered up because the beams would be sort of raw structure.
So we'll take the cost of the
Instead of
sheetrock
trimmed
and
down.
put the stain on it.
Instead of trimmed out. Trimming out is a carpentry cost, and that's a lot more intense in terms of the labor involved than it would be just covered in drywall. That's pretty quick and pretty inexpensive relatively speaking. So that's really what the difference in that number is there. But I think that is the first element that, as I said before, that I would hope we could absolutely, beyond the base building, we could incorporate, because it's just would be more trouble, more expensive to do that later on. Wood flooring would be easier to add. Some of these other elements are much easier to add later on. Yes?
I want to bring everyone's attention that we have awesome bathrooms right here. Do you remember, we didn't used to have bathrooms at all, and we've added these great bathrooms, and we have bathrooms down here. Why put 2 one-holers here right when you're walking into the church? My suggestion would be to do away with these bathrooms right here, because we already got them right there, and make this storage room large enough to accommodate chairs or stackable pews or whatever we're going to sit on, cushions or whatever, so that the storage room is large enough to function as a storage room.
And that's an idea worth considering.
How does it affect the financial?
I would say the cost of the bathroom, the storeroom is certainly a lot less expensive than finishing out a bathroom. Probably on the order of $10,000 to $12,000 could be saved. You could actually plumb those in roughly for bathrooms, but using the storage initially, and then come back and refinish them. Wouldn't have to get underneath the crawl space. Just come back and refinish them and fit them out at a later date too. That's another idea that can be considered. Tried to keep it a little bit simple, but that's one that I've already thought about before, and we've had a little conversation about. The reason for the bathrooms being there is really a convenience, because it is a little bit of a ways. Okay, it is a little bit of a ways. And secondly, I think as your congregation becomes even more young, and it probably will, you're going to have many more children that have to be attended to, and that's just much easier for a mother or a dad to take them around and take care of them.
I agree with that.
That's the reason.
I agree with that, but I don't know about you. There are very few one-hole, windowless bathrooms that are appealing so close to the entrance of your sanctuary.
So anyway, that's certainly an good idea. And there are other ones that will come alive as well.
When I brought that up once before, I was told that part of the reason for that was for marriages, brides and grooms to be able to prepare
There's that as
themselves
well
there
too.
and coming in, so it's multifaceted. It's not just bathroom.
It's also, these can function as what I would call as a family bathroom as well too.
Might even have a place to hang
Where a
clothes.
husband and wife might need, or a wife might need assistance from their spouse, or someone's handicapped that might need further assistance. You could accommodate 2 people in the single room to do
We
that.
won't feel as though those bathrooms are right beside the entrance to the
They are
nave,
beside.
because the narthex is ever so much larger. They are obviously off to the side.
They're actually through a cased
Yes.
opening that kind of provides a degree of separation and obvious separation from the main foyer and the northeast itself.
Yes, Randy, I know that you addressed this at the meeting before, but I think some people are not there. On the vision wall, the wish wall, we call it, a lot of people prefer to have the sanctuary not be rectangular or, the nave shape. And they wanted something more round or, octagonal with some shape to it. So would you kind of explain how, when we brought that up in the art committee, how kind of looked at that. I realize we can still make changes when we get to the design phase. Would you address that again for
I
people?
will, and I plan to do that is when I talk about the dream wall.
Okay.
Can I defer to that a
Sure,
little bit?
yeah.
Because I do have that on my list to talk
Perfect.
about with the dream wall.
Kara had a question.
Oh, no, I was just wondering why we have 2 bathrooms right here instead of just one. If it is somewhere for us to put families in or somewhere where if you need to go somewhere fast, why is there 2 instead of 1? You would have a lot more room and a lot more, we were talking about weddings. A 2-person bathroom is not good for a bride and her bridesmaids to get ready in. It's just
Not
not
ideal.
And so by having 1 bathroom, we would cut the cost, but then have that there. And even if we put that into the storage, I just don't know why there's 2.
Can someone in the committee help me remember why we decided on the 2? Was it because we just felt we might want to have a men's and women's?
We did
That may have
discuss
been
that.
only it. That's what I seem to remember.
Initially, I thought we were talking about 3, 1 in the back and 2 up front.
That's true.
The rector's bathroom got cut.
The rector's bathroom is the one that needs to go away.
That's a great question, and that's something I think we should continue to keep on the table as we move through the process in the next step. Yes.
I'm wondering about the decision to have the choir tucked back there acoustically, because, now we have the choir at the back, but, we're in a small space and we have 8 people in the choir. But with this, because ears are designed that they hear from the front and the sides, mine, I can hear really well with them. But the choir is going to be singing, at the back of people's heads.
Yeah.
And now the choir, they can project, and we have wonderful congregational singing. Hopefully, as the church grows, we will have a larger choir and a larger music program. But we can hear the choir now because it's a short distance away. But with double the distance away from that, and especially placed at the angle, like the people in the bottom right quadrant aren't going to have anything. So what's the reasoning for having that back there instead of moving the choir into the chancel area where the voices are going to project toward the congregation?
There are several reasons that led us to that. First and foremost, there are generally 2 or 3 choices you can make in terms of choir placement. At the back of the chancel, which you always see in, for the most part, in Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterian churches. Occasionally you see them in a very traditional sense in Episcopal churches, but they're usually flanking to the sides when you do that. The very traditional approach to that. People, I think, that I found working with churches, that they think of the choir in the back tends to be a more Catholic kind of approach, because you see that in lots of Catholic churches.
Well, they're certainly elevated
but they're usually elevated. That's correct. They're usually elevated. In this case, we do have risers for the choir shown, and that would be important, very important, both for them to visually see the music director, but also to project their voices as well too. So that's one part, and we talked about those options. We ended up choosing the back probably for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons too is to accommodate it within a simple building form. A third place you can do it, and they're often done at times, is to do it in a small transept to the side as well too. The real critical consideration is the acoustics of the space, both from a natural standpoint and from potentially an enhancement standpoint. I think ultimately in this space you're probably going to want some sound enhancement with the system. Hopefully not overwhelming to the point where it feels like it's the natural voice. I think that's really important. So it's in this sort of next phase of work we would do, we will do a more detailed analysis of the acoustics of the space. to determine that this can work well. I did complete a year and a half ago up at St. James in Clayton. They used to have a small space that seated about 100 people, and we expanded that to about 150 seats. Their choir used to sit in chairs to the very back, just in a row. I mean, they were like in the last 2 or 3 pews. And that's where they sang from, behind. And that seemed to work okay for them. When we expanded the sanctuary, we actually expanded to the rear, and we moved them to the rear, not unlike in a condition sort of like this. We also turned them at an angle because, and that's part of what we're doing here, because you want to create diffusion in the acoustic of the space. What you definitely want to avoid is having the reverberation from their voices off of this wall come back at a much slower rate than what you would actually hear from them. I'm getting into acoustics, and if I get a little too technical here, I'm sorry. And it's when you hear the real voice and you hear the reverberation too much later than that, it creates a very confused and fuzzy sound. So that's just a long way of saying we will look at the acoustics of this space. And that's some of the reasons that we ended up with this configuration. Last thing I would want is for it to be a real serious problem. So we'll do the evaluation that's needed and look at that.
Out of curiosity,
the next phase of the process.
As envisioned there, what's the capacity, choir capacity?
I don't have it shown here, but it's at least 20. I do know that.
I think we're
It's more than double what you
20 to
have.
25.
20 to maybe 25, right.
And what's the sliding glass about?
Sliding glass? Oh, the little sliding glass, that's for a sound booth to be right behind there, and it's elevated so that you can see over the choir. And why we call it sliding glass, I don't know. It would be a glass panel so they can maintain visual control. Sometimes it's really good. One reason to have it be sliding glass, just occurs to me, is it would be good for this person who's in control of the sound is to hear the actual sound rather than just to hear the reverb, the sound systems. So they can make adjustments if necessary. And them being nearby the choir is really good from that perspective too. I guess they would probably crack that window open a little bit. Most of the time, in the work that I've done, there's not usually a glass separation. It's either in a balcony or at the very back of the back row of the sanctuary. Here we've been able to accommodate in this corner a nice little sound booth, and I think that's a nice feature. Yes.
What projection of congregational growth do we have?
That's out of my territory. I don't really know if any work's been done on that. I know that was on the dream wall. I think someone did ask about a question about that. There is data available at the diocesan level that can give you some idea about the growth in your area, in the Macon area, and some idea based on history and what the economic projections are like for the area. It would give you what would be your share that you might be reasonably be able to expect would become members of St. Francis. I'll give you my humble gut feeling. I think y'all are positioned excellently for growth in this area, not just because of the economics of growth in the Macon area, but because of what the Episcopal Church represents now. And your inclusiveness is really an opportunity for you to grow really quite well. So that's just my personal opinion. That's not based on any facts.
Would that not be information that needs to be developed as far as the campaign is concerned?
I think that's probably something that is planned to this next step would be developed as a part of the feasibility work that's done by your consultant. Yes.
Speaking of acoustics, so the altar party, would that there would be like, would there be any acoustic assistance, like with speakers, or would that be purely their voice, like from the altar?
I think that you would have a sound system of sorts, and hopefully it would be an enhancement system and not so much a booming sound system.
Because
I think it's really, it's really difficult to design any worship space to be really good for worship and the spoken word. In the Episcopal Church, we have a tendency to emphasize the music side. Get that right first, and then we can enhance the spoken word.
Because, like, I have to attend Mass at St. Joseph's Catholic Church with my school, and they, of course, being so big, use speakers for on the altar, but I'll hear the sound, but I won't know where it's coming from, and it's kind of like you were talking about earlier, a bit fuzzy. But part of my main issue is that, like, I will hear somebody speaking, but I won't see where it's coming from, and I'll have to search around. I'll do a 360 around the whole entire church looking, and
Usually at the altar.
actually,
Let me just mention, there are lots of ways to do the sound system. The traditional and the least expensive way is just to have some big speakers hung in the right spot so it just sort of fills the space.
all right.
The other extreme of that is often what I call is, in fact, it's what we have at St. Luke's in my home church, and we paid the extra money for it. It's called pewback speakers. We have little small speakers. There are 3, one on each end and one in the middle. And that is toned down to the point where it sounds like the sound is right beside me. It's coming from right beside me, but I'm actually seeing the person who's speaking in the pulpit or at the lectern. So it is more expensive, but it's that's something we'll just have to get into at later stages in the project. I'm talking about the sound system.
All right.
But it's important, very important. Over here first.
My question was sort of related. Is the sound booth factored into the $837,000 figure? Because I consider that a luxury item, not a necessity.
The booth itself, yes. Is the equipment in there? I think it is, yes. And that's, don't take this the wrong way. That's a little bit of the detail that I'd have to look back to just to be sure, but it would be essential to have something.
Oh, it would be essential to have a sound system. A sound booth, to me, sounds a little beyond.
It's really, I call it a found space. It's sort of a natural location and spot, and we have a small space for that.
Okay, I would just be curious of the extra costs.
No, it's included in this base core cost.
Great, so I would just want to know how much that costs.
Well, if we didn't do that, we'd probably call it a storage room, or a vesting room, or something of that nature.
Or enlarge the bathroom.
Or Rick's
Another question too, could you just walk through, I don't think I was here for the other meeting, could you just walk through what's on the chancel? I noticed that it was liturgical furnishings for $10,000. Could you just sort of walk through what those are?
Yes, that would be an altar table, okay, a lectern, and in this case, we're showing a single lectern that would be used. Sometimes there is a lectern and a pulpit. There would be 2 side benches for acolytes to sit on. There would be a bishop's chair and 3 other chairs potentially. And there would be a rear table at the reredos for the elements, perhaps to be retired to. There's a small square shown right here. There could be a number of things. Sometimes that's nothing more than a pedestal for a flower arrangement, possibly. There are some other smaller details that would be really important to consider. Where's the Paschal candle, etc. So we would look at as a part of that package. So. And some of those might be brought forward from the chapel. I don't know yet. We don't really know that yet. That's another whole little design process that would come later in our process, overall process.
Thank you.
Yes, Christian.
Well, just quickly add on, if I'm thinking of like sound system, like with the sound booth, I mean, we have controls in the sacristy right now, and it's nothing like too fancy, and it would cost something, but if we got new ones, but I don't think it'd be a giant fancy one if I'm correct in that assumption.
It might be able to be adapted to.
Yeah, like we could move that one.
Sound control
Yeah.
panel as well, so, yes.
Randy, the way it's designed now, our priest often forgets things in the sacristy. And so,
The altar guild forgets to put stuff out.
if you notice, in order to get to the sacristy, you have to leave the chancel, go out in front of people sitting in pews, and come in the side door.
That's to make it so obvious.
Yes. Wouldn't it be better to have it so he could sneak out here the way he does now?
I'm sorry,
We'll
Dad,
make
I
note
tried
of
to
that
take
and keep talking about that. There's absolutely no reason we couldn't have a side door, other than there would be a couple steps there.
Yes.
Unless we build steps going up into the sacristy itself. But, we certainly can do that. I personally like to see the chancel be as sort of clean as possible, as far as the walls are concerned, but I've done those before, so.
Randy, you got.
Yes.
I had to step away for a moment, so I may have missed this, it's already been asked, but are you still gonna have a place for, the flower guild? If you eliminate the bathroom, will there still be plumbing put in, to maybe possibly expand that space in the future? Or we already have
Yes,
space?
we have two spaces here. One is designated as sacristy, the other is designated as flower guild and some sacristy storage.
Yay!
But then we're having
Sorry.
That's part of the original, 800 and.
Those spaces would be part of the basement building.
That's what I was wondering.
And they would be fitted out. We'd have sinks and cabinets and so forth. That's essential.
We are at about an hour, so I want to be conscious of time and questions, and I know there was some information about the dream wall that.
Yeah, I'd like to speak. Can I go ahead and speak about the
I just want to make one statement.
Okay.
I don't think, in growth, this will be covered later, but one of the things we should be very intense, if we're going to have growth, we've got to prepare electronically for the young people. They are very electronically informed. They use it. We need a good sound system, and we really need to prepare. If growth is coming to us, it's coming from you. So we'll prepare that in the future.
Great point, Bill. Let me just.
Not to harp on the sound system, but a lot of young people actually don't want a concert when they come to church. They want it to be pure and simple and not what we're bombarded with in our culture every other day.
Let me assure you, I will not be getting it. It really was just, really what Christian said, to put the controls there. And it would be great if we could have some lighting controls there, but I'm not gonna hold my breath.
And the space is set up to be, so that it could be very flexible, depending on how the seating kind of works out. So that you could have other kinds of events. You could have concerts of sorts and theatrical events and such too. So, let me just say, there are a couple of copies, not a whole bunch, but this is going to be posted on your website. I believe the dream wall comments have been already posted. I believe Tammy had put those together and posted them on the website. I have drafted a response to each and every comment on that. Hopefully will give you some idea of the work that our committee did together with me in terms of thinking about these various things. Some of them came from them. Some of them are things that they might not have put on the dream wall, but they would have been thinking about anyway too. And some of them not. So we have really tried to respond to them. Does that mean you get everything you put on the dream wall? Probably not. Does that mean we're all going to get everything we want? Probably not. But this is a way to engender that kind of input from everyone so that there's some sense of, first, you at least have a chance to have a say-so, that you gave some input and it got considered. Secondly, you might have gotten what you asked for, asked the Lord for in this process. So I'm pleased, they're my responses, and I'm characterizing and paraphrasing from the work we did. And you might not like some of them. That's okay. I'll be glad to take feedback and have more conversation about that. Are they still all open? As we said before, this is a design direction, but we're still open to this process, in this process at this stage. So what I wanted to do was to just give you a little quick sort of characterization of kind of the nature of the comments as I read through them and tried to digest them. And very quickly, maybe a little bit of how we responded to them. There were several comments about seating and flexibility of use. We had a fair amount of dialogue about seating, but we reached no conclusions because we had a very diverse opinion about whether we ought to have chairs or whether we ought to have pews, or even a combination of that. And no decisions have been made about that. We know that's still an open question for further conversation, debate, and finding whether we can even afford to have pews or chairs initially that are all brand new as opposed to what you have now or what maybe might be gifted by another congregation. That happens sometimes. So the flexibility of use there was some input about that, and speak to the shape of the space. One of our challenges is to get you something that is economical. Shape of space has everything to do with economy. The perfect space is round in terms of efficiency because it has the least amount of outside wall to the amount of floor space. The next most perfect space is a square. The next one from that is a rectangle. And then you go irregular. That's the most expensive. And that primarily relates to the structure of the space, and it relates to what the construction industry is in the marketplace is accustomed to doing. Can we do something highly custom? Of course we can, but it would be much more expensive. So what we have is what looks like a somewhat rectangular building, but when you really get down to it, the basic space is pretty squarish. So it's really efficient from that perspective, which means not only, which speaks to the cost, but also speaks to the possibility of how flexible it can be. There were some comments about could we pull the altar out into the center of the space and do a special worship like that and gather the chairs all around it. To the extent we have flexible enough seating or seating that's easily moved, you certainly can do that. Could you have another event where you only have, say, half the chairs? You could do that. So from that standpoint, the shape of the space is really pretty efficient. I'll remind you that what we're showing right here is the most efficient way to get seats into a space that's square. And they're drawn, they look like pews. They could be a bunch of chairs alongside each other, of course. There are other ways to shape that. I happen to love, and didn't draw it this way, it's a little less efficient, but I happen to love at least just angling the chairs. So you can just, on this side, you can look over and see that person, you wanted to be sure they were here this Sunday. And if they're not, you want to be able to make a call. And it's a little easier to do that. Even just the slightest angle can often do that. Metaphorically, I like it because it's like the bones of a fish. And that has lots of biblical reference as well, too. There were several comments about curved pews. They're fantastic. They're real expensive. First, if you're gonna have a pew, it's a little bit more difficult to move around if you want to be flexible. Secondly, if it's curved, it's even more difficult to move around. So I don't see curved pews in the cards, although it's not off the table. If there's money to consider it later on, and that's what the powers that be in this your church decide you want to do, then great, I'm all for it. I've not done them before. I'd love to have a chance to do that. There were several comments about what I call sustainability, which is also about being green and so forth. There was a specific reference to being leadership in energy and environmental design, which is a specific process. It's monitored out and managed out of Washington, D.C. It's a very expensive process, but I have recommended for some time now, as I've been working with you, there's a similar process that's done by South Face, based in Atlanta. It's much more streamlined. It accomplishes the same goals. We do have to pay them a small fee, but it's much, much less expensive, and it's really a great tool and consulting group to work with. I've actually done two church projects already with them, and they've been really good to work with and very economical to work with. So to the extent that we will be able to, in this piece right here, afford to do that, we're planning to do that. Even if we can't, we get most of that from me sort of anyway. This is a way of really getting a third-party validation, which is really very helpful. And you do get a little plaque that you get to brag about later on. So, lots of comments about the narthex. The most important thing I think to remind you about is we don't just have a narthex. We also have a foyer and a circulation hall, and they are two separate spaces. Narthex to me is where you prepare to go to worship. It needs to be a quieter space that serves as a transition from the hubbub that goes on here. That hubbub is where I think some of the real church happens, but we also want to get to worship. And if we just had only one set of doors and one wall between that, which you sort of experience now, we would sort of experience now if that's all we did was attach the sanctuary or the nave right to that wall, then that would be a significant interruption in preparing for worship. So we have a sizable narthex that is a transition space. And I hope that responds well to those who made that comment. There were some comments about tradition, maintaining some traditional elements, and I think that we have done that by trying to incorporate some Gothic elements, which are often associated with the Episcopal Church, but at the same time put them into a context that they're not so overwhelming to the context of your church, the existing buildings that you have now. So we tried to hit a balance on that. At the front door, as you come in, with the Gothic arch there, Gothic arched windows, and a reredos at the rear that's also suggestive of Gothic arch. These all add to the look and feel of the space, and in some cases for you may contribute toward how you feel when you're in worship, and how you feel you're connected with God. So, windows, there were comments about windows. The windows we're showing now are these Gothic elements here. On the side, and a round window at the top. They're all shown in sky blue right now, as if they were clear. There were some comments about stained glass, and there were also some comments about being able to see out. Your committee and I felt that we ought to keep focus on the chancel and what's going on in the chancel, and that if we have large areas of glass at the rear of the chancel or even right to the sides of the chancel, that while you might be able to see the trees in the back, you could also see some walls of the existing buildings that might not be as nice, and that your focus is taken away. So we made the decision, at least in this representation, to keep the windows up high, and that they would be designed so that you could add stained glass to them at any point in time in the future. Are we open to talking about some additional windows? We certainly can be at this stage. As we say, this is still early in the process. So I mentioned the organ before. There was a few comments about the organ. There was comments about accessibility and welcoming aspects on the pure accessibility side. We do have some bathrooms that are shown that are fully accessible nearby. We do have a handicap ramp here. A comment from the session we had before was, a question was, well, you're not showing the ramp that currently goes to the fellowship hall right here. It is a little crowded, but we decided, my response was that, and it's still on the table, that we would consider in some future phases as we develop the design further, maybe replacing that with a ramp as well too, so that you wouldn't have to just, to go to the fellowship hall in a wheelchair, wouldn't have to come up here and go all the way around this way, that you could still go in the front door. I personally think there's one element of that's nice, that the sanctuary is where you do approach in an accessible way, even if you're going to the fellowship hall. But as a matter of convenience, if we need that second ramp, we certainly can incorporate it. See, we talked about materials some already. There were several mentions of wood and water. I'm not showing anything relative to water here, but I think having a water element in some way, everything from the baptismal font to maybe even a small pool out in the garden area. There could be several ways to incorporate that, and I think those are, I always feel like water is an essential element of biblical reference that we need to have one way or another. So we will continue to keep those in mind. And there was, the last item I want to mention, there was a couple of mentions about animals. This is St. Francis. In fact, there was a comment about animal, could we have an animal room? That was a new one to me. And we all laughed, but you know, after I thought about that a little bit, do we want to have a room? We'll turn one of these bathrooms into the animal. I think, yes, we do have an animal room, and it's everywhere. Because I don't know what you do on your St. Francis Day where you do that, but we used to at St. Luke's, marching down the aisle. And we even had snakes and rabbits. That we did away with that a while back. But it's still done in some places. We also have a really wonderful portico in this design, which is a room. It will be like a room. In fact, I suggested to the committee that one of the nice things about the portico with this large porch is you might have some special services or gatherings out there that like that could occur there. They're still really closely affiliated and associated with your worship space. So I think that's my best answer about the animal room, is that the animal rooms wherever you want to have them.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to apologize. My wife is like winking at me and saying that was our son that submitted that, so I'm sorry.
You know what? The best of ideas come from the creative. So that's just kind of a summary of my take on all the comments. I've probably left a few out. There may have been some single instances. That's not meant to slight anyone. Please, this will be posted. Please take the time to digest it and digest my responses, which are, I'm speaking for not just myself, but for the committee that did this work to this point. And any feedback you want to have about those, we're wide open to having more conversation.
I just want to say one thing. The church in, where is it? In North Georgia that you redid. No, not that one. Clayton. Clayton.
In Clayton.
Yeah, I've been, my sister-in-law's Episcopal church in Clayton that I've been to did it, and I saw it before it was redone, and I saw it after it was redone. They redid it, they remodeled. It looked really good. good job.
Well, thank you, thank you. One of the nice things that we tried to accomplish there was that it be very seamless, so that when it's finished, it didn't really look like it was added on, that it looked like that's the way it was built to begin with, and I think we were able to accomplish that there, so.
I actually have one other question over here.
I have heard no mention of a cross being in this facility.
Oh, there will be a cross.
This is
I don't
Christian.
know that we know exactly the answer to that yet. That's a detail that's really important,
Yes,
but
it
that
is.
would come at a little bit later stage in the overall design process. I personally, and I get some rectors to agree with me usually on this, that there ought to be one primary cross in the space. And it not be confused with crosses in several locations. And it could be several possibilities, I'm just going to throw it out. It certainly could be on the rear wall, right above what you would see beyond the altar table, maybe right below the circular window. It could also be hung, suspended from the structure, right over the table in the chancel. And I've done that, and I think that's a really nice thing to do, especially, it would depend on the cross element itself and what it's like, what its nature is. And it may take some special lighting to really catch it. But those are two sort of classic locations that I think would be real important. I don't know if I'm remembering it right, but whether there might have been a comment about the cross in the chapel being used and brought over too.
Wasn't that the original, when that, somebody corrected me, but wasn't it like gifted and we had to use it then?
Yes.
And we took the one down that had been with us at the old church and brought it here, and then we took that down to put up the one that we have now, but the one that we have now was given in hopes of a new space.
I don't think it was given in hopes of a new space. It was a gift to the church, to us.
But anyway, and then we would take the old cross, which must be somewhere.
Yes.
Well, the old cross was an outline, and
Right.
the Saint, the cross given in memory of Saint,
Francis?
no, of Sister, was it Caroline?
It's a good name.
Was set in, not Caroline, what was her name?
Sister Sophie?
Sophie.
Margaret.
Sister Sophie.
Margaret, the one we have is Margaret.
No, it's Sister Sophie. But anyway, that cross was gonna come, that cross was gonna go in new space, and then the old cross was gonna come back in there.
Honestly, that's new information to me, and it's very helpful, and sooner or later, I'm sure that information will come out, and it's really important to honor the history, and to honor any memorials that might have been given as well, too, and what their intent was, in any process like this, so, I'm glad you mentioned that, we'll certainly be thinking of that along the way, incorporating that in some way, and maybe that's a simple answer to your question.
Other than it being posted on the website, I have 4 color copies if anybody wants to make sure they get a paper copy of this document that Randy
It's
has.
8 pages front and back.
So we didn't want
Conserve paper a little bit.
Yeah, we don't want to print all those out. But if anybody does want a paper copy rather than going to the website, and we will post it, hopefully, I mean, it may not be today, but in the next few days, under the vestry tab on the website is usually where those documents are.
I appreciate y'all coming today and really good questions and good input.
Thank you very much.